of something that I've had a vision of doing for a little while now, and that is to talk about the movements of skiing without actually having ski equipment on, which might sound kind of weird, but the reality is that when we're out on the snow together, you know, I'm making a lot of movements inside my boot, with my legs, with my body that may not actually be that visible because of the ski equipment. I mean, you can't see through my boot, obviously. So my idea was to make sure that everybody understood what the movements of skiing were, and maybe get some practice and some awareness of those without actually having the ski equipment on. So that's kind of the basic idea of what we're doing. This is going to be, like I said, either a 4 or a 5-part series. And the way we're going to break it up has to do with the 5 alpine fundamentals of the PSIA. And if you're not familiar with those would be balancing your center of mass over your base of support so that you can affect pressure along the length of the ski, directing pressure towards the outside ski, turning only with the legs. That edging comes from angulation and inclination, and that we regulate pressure with up and down movements of our body. Okay, so those are the 5 things, and those are, I'm going to try to cover all of those in this series of for today, what would be good is either if you're in tennis shoes or bare feet, and maybe you have something to lean on, like a real stable chair or a wall. At times, if we're just experimenting with some stuff, that'd probably be pretty consistent throughout the series of clinics. And then I think Cara already mentioned that maybe if you have a noisy household, you got kids running around or something like that, then maybe throw on the mute or something like that. That might be good. The very first part, you can kind of relax for about 5 or 10 minutes here. I'm going to be covering this morning in the initial part of today some basic foundational material that before we get moving. Okay, so talked about that. Let's see, talked about that. This will be an interactive series. I'll want you to be moving and experimenting around with the movements, but it's not really a workout per se. So just be aware of that. We're going to talk about ski performance versus body performance. So I think we'll explain that. We're also going to kind of go through a basic movement pattern that I would propose that everybody really become familiar with. And this movement pattern will be a great place to adapt off of. And in order to understand that movement pattern, we're going to talk about the planes of motion, or something called the cardinal planes of motion. And we're going to review those, okay? So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about ski performance. And I have a ski right here. And we're going to try and keep it really simple today. Maybe some of you guys might have heard me talk about how a ski is designed and why it turns and things like that. We're going to keep it really simple. The basic points today is that this area right here, just behind the toe piece of the binding, is pretty much the lengthwise center of the ski. That would be underneath the ball of your foot. Okay, and if you can learn and be comfortable balancing on the ball of your foot when you ski, the ski becomes very easy to turn because it's a very balanced place to turn the ski from. The ski wants to turn from this place. It wants, especially it wants to pivot. Okay, and lots of times people, like if you're skiing in West Bowl or some easy off-piste, people struggle to turn the ski. They're not confident in that, but if you can get up to the ball of the foot, I guarantee you the ski will be very easy to turn. All right. The other kind of thing that I want you to understand about ski performance is that what we want to do in terms of leveraging along the length of the ski is that through the initiation phase of the turn, we want to move the weight to the forward part of the ski. Okay, there's lots of reasons for that. I've already mentioned one, that the ski becomes very easy to redirect into the new turn. But through the initiation part of the turn, that beginning phase, there's 3 phases of the turn: the initiation or the beginning phase, the shaping phase or the middle phase, and the completion phase or the finishing phase or the end of the turn. Okay, through that initiation or that beginning phase, we want to move the weight to the front of the ski. Okay, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. Once we have the turn, well, why we do that is so that we can get the front of the ski to bite and to start to scribe an arc in the snow. Okay, we need to engage the tip to activate the turn. All right, we're trying to get the tip of the ski to dig out a channel in the snow and to start to scribe a new arc. Once we have that happening, once we're into like the shaping phase or that middle phase, we can move our weight back to a more centered place. Somewhere along the arch of our foot is fine. And that allows us to then pressure the whole ski. And that's important. We want to distribute pressure along the whole length of the ski. Unfortunately, a lot of our instructors, especially our rookie instructors, tend to leverage too much towards the tail of the ski. And when we leverage too much towards the tail of the ski wants to go straight. It doesn't want to turn. It doesn't feel cooperative. So we want to try and avoid that. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So once again, we want to be comfortable being up towards the ball of the foot. At the initiation phase, we want to pressure through the tip of the ski. And then once we have the turn established, we can move to a more centered place where we're pressing on the entire ski. This is a really good and descriptive type of ski performance, description of ski performance, all the way up through about low advanced levels. Once we get up into high advanced levels and expert level skiers actually press even further along the length of the ski in both directions. We might talk about that a little bit as well. But for most of us, if we can just get used to moving forward and then to a centered place, we're pretty good. Okay? Any questions on that so far? I guess not, because you guys are all muted, huh? But if you do have questions and you are near a computer, there is a way to type in your question. Is that correct, Cara?
That is correct. You can type a question into the chat, and if we get a number of questions that are the same, I'll sort of filter them, and then we can pass them on to Mark. This isn't there's 15 of us in this group, I think. So if you have a question, I think, Mark, if it's okay with you, I don't mind if people.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think it'll get too chaotic.
I'd rather have it be interactive and people can just ask a question right then and there, if that's fine. So does anybody have any questions so far? I'm going to take that as a no. So, all right, next we're going to talk about a basic movement pattern that I want you to all strive to achieve, okay? And we'll talk about this in terms of the 3 phases of the turn. And that would be that from the end of the old turn, we start our new turn by flattening and rolling our ankles. And as we do that, we extend both legs. This is how we're going to try to get towards the ball of our foot. You can see that as I'm doing this movement, and you can try it as well. Kind of tip your feet on an edge like this, and then roll your ankles flat and extend both legs and try and end up towards the balls of your feet, okay? You can try that on both sides. Okay, so this is what we want to do for the initiation phase of the turn. This is the body performance that is going to affect the ski performance of getting the weight onto the shovel of the ski. Does that make sense? So there's our instructors, and Carrie Sharp is a kind of a classic example. When Carrie started skiing with us, she made some kind of unusual moves through the initiation phase of the turn. Is that correct? Carrie, you there? Yeah. Okay. So
Yes.
right. What Carrie did, I remember, she made a really big shuffling movement. Okay. So instead of doing the movement we just talked about, she had a big shuffle going on. She would kick her inside foot forward a lot and use that to change the edges. Other things that people do, Trish, what you were doing for a while there is you were picking the inside ski up and just getting it out of the way. These things can also be used in combination with a rotational move of our upper body to take the skis off of edge and put them on the new edge, or simply a tipping of the upper body in order to change that edge. So what ideally we want to do is we want to start, or we always want to start any sort of edging movement from the ground up, from our ankles up. And the reason why that is because when we're down low near our ankles, we don't have to move so much to actually have a big effect on the ski. If we do movements that involve our upper body, we have to have big movements because they're further away from the snow, and that moves our center around and makes things challenging. So again, through the initiation phase, rolling the ankles flat, extending both legs, moving to the ball of the foot. One other important point here is that at some point in every good turn initiation, there should be a place where we pass through where we're evenly weighted on both feet. Okay, this is kind of something that's a little bit different than how we used to ski on straight skis. On straight skis, we used to make a really quick weight transfer, but now we want to pass through a place where we're, at least for a little while, balanced on both feet as we move across the skis. All right, so that's the initiation phase. Once we enter the shaping phase, we want to be in a position where we're tall, where we can move our way. Once we have the new edges established in the snow, we can move our way to a more centered place that's somewhere on our arch. But we want to be tall, relatively square to the skis, so that this line of my hips would more or less be across the way the skis are pointing or perpendicular. And we also want to end up well balanced over the outside ski. It doesn't mean we have to be super far over, but we definitely, as we enter the shaping phase, or that middle phase of the turn, we want to have good balance early on the outside ski. We want to carry that position more or less to the fall line. And then from the fall line to the turn finish, we're going to build pressure on the outside ski. And we're going to do that by bringing the upper body more over the outside ski. We're going to start to create some separation here between the upper and the lower body. And we're going to start to increase edge angle through some angulation. Okay, so that's going to look like this. Okay, does that make sense? So that's our basic overall movement pattern. Up and forward to start the turn using the ankles, tall through the early part of the turn, well balanced over the outside ski, centered on the ski, coming through the finishing phase of this turn, remembering, and the latter half of the turn, remembering to stay centered over the ski so we can pressure the whole length of the ski. And we're going to increase pressure by bouncing over the upper body over the outside ski, increasing separation and increasing edge angle. Now this basic movement pattern is a great one. It's not the only way to ski, but it's just a good one to have as your home-based movement pattern. From here, we can do things that are different. If we're in bumps, if we're on steep terrain, we can change the duration, intensity, rate, and timing of our movements to adapt to different types of terrains, different types of speeds, different sizes of turns, as well as different people with issues with either disabilities, inability to make certain movements, or injuries, okay? And we definitely have some of our instructors, and this is something that I want to be very clear about, is that this basic movement pattern directs pressure up through the snow, through your ankle, your knee, and your hip joint. And some people actually have some injuries in these areas, and they have maybe some cartilage damage, and lining up the way that I'm telling you to line up may not work for an individual person if they potentially have an area where as that pressure is coming up, it's on that kind of weaker spot of cartilage, either in the knee or in the hip usually. And so then we may have to adapt a little bit off of this basic movement pattern because we don't really want to create any discomfort, okay? So that's our basic movement pattern that we want to strive to achieve, and we'll be working on that next year. All right. Remember that we're always talking about body performance and how that affects the ski performance. So that's our body performance piece. We're going to talk a little bit about the cardinal planes of motion here. Today, we're going to mostly be working on a plane of motion that would be like if there was a plane, a wall that cut me in half this way, all right, and stuck out the back side of me. And Cara, you have a graphic, is that correct? That you can kind of put up here real quick. I'm sure she's trying to do that right now. So this plane, we can just call this the fore-aft plane. If I'm moving, making body movements along this plane, then that would be, those would be fore-aft movements, okay? So movements along this plane are fore-aft movements. And so Cara, we see the screen. If you can click on that one, we see basically a selection of different photos. I think it's the furthest one on the right. If we could click on that one, that would be great. Sure, she's working on that. So this would be, technically it's called the sagittal plane, but we can just think about it as being the front to back plane. That's the one we're going to work on the most today. Other planes of movement would be if I had a plane that sliced me through the side like this, okay? We can think of that. Movements along that plane would be lateral movements. And then we have a plane that would cut me in half this way. And those planes, we can think of, along that plane, we would be making rotary type of movements. All right, so we'll get more into those types of movements in a later clinic. For today, we're going to be working more on the fore-aft plane. All right, so here's where it starts to get a little bit more interactive for you guys. We're going to explore this. We're going to explore these planes of movement along the fore-aft plane. And we can start by just rocking back and forth on your feet, okay? So I'm right now just moving from toward the front of my foot to the back of my foot. You might want to hang on to a chair so you don't tip over, just like this, okay? And, you know, it's pretty basic, pretty simple, but this is a movement and a balance that can be developed, okay? If I'm back here on my heel, do my hips look behind my feet slightly? I bet they do. If I'm more towards the ball of my foot, my hips are directly over my feet. That's important. We're going to see that in a graphic in a little bit. Right, so that's just a good way to get started right here. It's just rocking back and forth on our feet. Okay. Next thing we can do is I want you to make a little bit of a hop and land in an athletic position. We'll do like 3 hops. All right. Great. Now I want you to think, we'll do 3 more hops, and I want you to think, what is the last part of your foot to leave the ground? And what is the first part of your foot that lands? So we'll do 3 more hops again. Okay. So I bet, and since I'm not getting a lot of feedback from you guys, I'm kind of betting that the balls of your feet are the first place that, the last place that comes off the ground and the first place that lands on the ground. All right, and that's great, because that is very similar, that hopping movement is very similar to the initiation phase of our turn. In fact, at level 2, we have a task called leapers, where we actually hop to change the edges of the skis, okay? So when we hop, we're extending both legs, just like I talked about in our basic movement pattern. And when we land, we're landing on the ball, towards the ball of the foot, and we're flexing in our ankles and flexing in our spine. All right, so it's somewhat analogous to that initiation phase. All right, the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to move towards the ball of the foot, and I want you to go down into a tuck position and come back up to an athletic position. We don't have to come all the way straight back up. Move down, and I want you to try and stay balanced towards the forward part of your foot. Come down into a tuck position or somewhat of a tuck position. Stand back up to an athletic stance, taller and athletic stance. So we can stay balanced pretty much anywhere we want on our foot and go to some pretty extreme ranges of bending our joints, okay? Now I bet there's not too many people here that are just bending their knees and bringing their butt back, right? But that is what happens a lot with us when we ski. And why is that? Why do we end up a lot of times back here? It has to do with the ski boot and people kind of resting on the back of the ski boot. We don't want to use the ski boot to balance with. We don't want to rely on any structure of the ski boot to support us. The ski boot is designed to basically strengthen our ankle joint and give it more support. So when we're in ski boots, we want to be still moving our ankles like we are here, okay, as much as the ski boot allows us to. That brings us to, as we do this, you can see me moving my arms forward in order to maintain that balance over the ball of my foot. I can keep my hands here and maintain the balance over the forward part of the foot, but I have to bring everything, my upper body, quite a bit forward. Our arms and our hands are very important tools to help us maintain balance. Each arm with the pole and the glove accounts for about 5% of our body mass. So both arms, 10% of our body mass, hanging way out here in space. And just like a tightrope walker that uses that long pole to balance with, our arms, when we're skiing, are very good balancing aids. If we want to use those to help stabilize our balance. Unfortunately, when people ski, they tend to get these habitual movement patterns where their arms are swinging, usually with the pole swing oftentimes. And this obviously takes away from their use as abilities to kind of keep our balance nice and quiet. So the basic arm and hand position that we want to have is hands are always above the waist. The elbows are in front of the torso and slightly out to the side. And the hands are always slightly wider than the elbows, okay? So that's the basic position that we want to have with our arms and our hands. All right, I'm going to move the camera just real briefly here so you can see my ankles. There I am. There we are. I'll get nice and close. All right. So now what I want you to do is I want you to just flex your ankles forward and back. When we're bringing our ankles, our shins forward, our tibias forward, this is called dorsiflexion, okay? When we're bringing it up, it's called plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion is what I want you to focus on, this movement right here, all right? And this is an incredibly important part of skiing, all right? It's
Mark,
really, really hard to ski well. What?
I do have a question. This is Carrie. I was just wondering, I'm watching your, this is strange. I'm watching your toes, and I'm wondering, do you pull them up at all, like slightly, or do you push them down into the carpet?
You know, that's a really great question, Carrie, because hopefully I'm not scrunching them up like this inside the boot. But I don't really think about my toes too much. I think they more or less just stay flat. They need to be in contact with the footbed so that I can be making lateral movements. I do not pull my toes up though when I'm skiing, that I know of. So good question. I don't curl them down. I don't curl them up. I just try to leave them leave them as flat in there so that I can use them as a balancing platform as much as possible? Good question. So, so this flexion here is basically, it's like the most important movement in skiing. And it's the one, unfortunately, that people do the least. When I'm looking at intermediate level skiers out there, it is the joint that is the least used by typical intermediate level skiers on Stump Alley. If we're watching that, and that's kind of a shame. There's probably two reasons why that happens. One has to do with fear. And, you know, if you look at people who are skiing down Stump Alley, a lot of them aren't afraid of what's going on there. But because they tend to ski on terrain that's above their head and don't learn good technique at the start, they end up in a defensive movement pattern and they just ingrain that movement pattern. So it's fear-based in the end. The other reason why that happens a lot has to do with boot fit, okay? Where people are not in proper fitting boots. And there's been many times when people, probably in this group here, I've got you in a proper fitting ski boot, and I think if that's happened to you, you probably felt the advantage and the ease of balancing better because you're in a proper boot. All right, so when we're coming through that last phase of the turn, and if we go back to our basic movement pattern, we want to increase our edge through that, okay? And a lot of what I do inside the boot looks like this. So as I'm flexing forward, I'm rolling my ankles, okay? I go this way, and then I go this way. I want you to try this as well. And you can watch your feet and watch your ankles. So I'm doing it a lot right now. Sometimes when I'm in a ski boot, I don't have this much range of motion, especially in my boot because it's pretty stiff. But this kind of movement, and this is called an eversion here, and this is an inversion movement, but it's kind of a rolling of our ankles, and this only really works effectively if we're dorsiflex, okay? If we're flexing like this, we have a lot more range of motion, a lot more power to that movement. If we're tall and we don't flex there, we have a lot less range of motion to the side. So this is why that flexing our ankles into the front of the boot is so important, because it allows us to roll the ankles as we ski, okay? Another important point about this is if you watch me, you'll see that I'm rolling both ankles. And if you look at the angle here and here, we can call that the ankle angle. You can see that pretty much they stay the same. That's an important part of skiing. It's an important part of balance, that when we're flexing, that we flex both ankles. We have a lot of times we see people out there and they're flexing the outside ankle, but the inside ankle, it's not flexed as much, and there's a difference in those angles. As a school, I would like us to try to work on flexing both ankles together. And it takes some practice in order to do that and get used to that, okay? So this movement here is really, really important in skiing. I'd say it's probably the most important movement that we can make in skiing is this flexing forward in our boot and rolling our ankles. And that in our basic movement pattern, that's going to happen more at the end of the turn, or the last half of the turn, I guess you would say, okay? That's going to help us to increase our edge. Any questions so far? Okay, we're getting there. We're just going to move up the body. All right, I hit something on my phone. My video is stopped. I'm in a safe driving mode. What is happening? Can you guys hear me?
You're so funny. Yes, we can hear you. Click the video icon. You'll come back, I think.
I don't see the video icon.
Move your mouse. Oh, you. There you go.
Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. I can't see me right now, but that's okay. All right. All right. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
All right. So, okay, the next thing we're going to talk about are the knees. So the knee is basically like a hinge joint, okay? So it flexes and then it extends. Where people typically go wrong in their skiing a bit is they don't flex the ankle, but they do flex the knee quite a bit. Get my chair in my position here, okay? And you can see now that this brings my hips towards the rears of the behind my feet, and then obviously that's not going to create the ski performance we want. That's going to pressure towards the tails of the ski, and that's why that ankle is so important, because as we bend our knee, if we bend our ankle in coordination, we can keep our hips more over the middle of the ski and be in a position where we can bend the whole ski. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to overflex the knee and move and be off the rear of the boot, okay? Sometimes when you see people ski, you'll see them create an angle here in the knee. This is called knee angulation, surprisingly. But it's important to know that the knee doesn't really move in this direction. This is a sort of a result of the femur rotating in and the tibia rotating out, and a little bit of laxity in that joint as we bend our legs. Now, I want you to be wary of using too much knee angulation. Your knee is not that strong a joint. That's why it gets injured a lot. Doesn't have super big muscles really that surround it and support it. So I would rather us think about using the ankle and the knee as sort of fine tuning of the edge of the ski and getting the majority of the angulation coming from this joint right here. Okay, so this joint right here is called is your hip joint. It's a ball and socket joint. It's the best. It's probably the second most important joint to be aware of when we ski, because we have lots of range of motion out of this joint, and we have massive muscle groups that support it: the glutes, the quadriceps, the abdominals, the obliques, the hamstrings, even your latissimus dorsi, which is anchored up here, comes down and anchors on your pelvis as well. So lots of different muscle groups support this, are some of the largest muscles in our body. And so that's a great place to start to get some angulation and some edge control from. And again, we're further up off the snow now, so we need to make larger movements in this area to affect the ski. We're going to use the knee and ankle to fine tune that. So again, through the upper part of the turn, we're not so worried. We want to be balanced over the outside ski, but it's not so important that we make big angles, because we're not really fighting gravity at that point. It's from the fall line on that we have forces in the turn, and those are lining up with gravity, and that's where we have to start to make body movements where we can resist those forces and keep the ski tracking, keep the ski performance of having the tail of the ski follow the tip of the ski through the snow, bending the whole ski, okay? That brings us to basically the orientation of the pelvis. And I talked about and we'll cover this more in a later session, but in that latter part of the turn, we're gonna try and bring the upper body over the outside ski by creating some separation here. All right, so the important point about this is that this inside hip, if this is my outside ski and I'm finishing a left turn here, this inside hip needs to come up and forward slightly, and so that I can activate my spine in the correct way. All right, so if I keep this line kind of tipped in, I'm not going to be able to balance as effectively on the outside ski. If I can keep this line more level, then I am going to be better able to balance and direct pressure towards the outside ski. And that brings me to the spine. Spine is obviously made up of a lot of vertebrae. I can only bend so much this way, so much this way, so much this way, but I can bend a lot this way. That's just the way your spine is built. So if I can move my pelvis in that position, then I can bring that advantageous plane of motion of my spine into play, and I can bring my shoulders forward so that I can maintain balance along the length of the ski. Okay, what we don't want to do is not bend here. And when I'm working with people lots of times, and I get them into the position that I want them to be in, which might be something like this, like, my gosh, I feel like I'm sticking my butt out, and I'm like, sweet, you are a little bit, but it's actually just an athletic position. Okay, so to kind of sum this up, if I flex my ankles, it generally brings me forward. If I flex my knees, it generally brings me back. If I flex in the waist and my hip and spine, that brings me forward. The key to all of this fore-aft movement is to flex the ankles, okay? If I can flex the ankles, that allows me to keep my hips and my pelvis over my feet, allowing me to, and then I can adjust from there if I want to. And that's what allows me to get the ski performance that I'm after. Once again, the ski performance I'm after is going forward through the initiation phase of the turn, and then moving to a place through the latter parts of the turn where where I can pressure the whole ski. Okay, so I just want to leave you here today with just a couple of photos. And Cara, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so when we pulled up that graphic, we couldn't really see it. All we saw was the like typical window with all of the pictures.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want the planes of movement again?
Yeah, let's show them the plane. I can't really see anything right now, and I can't figure out why. So I'm just going to trust it. So if you could show them the planes of movement.
Planes of movement coming up.
There you go.
All right. Can everyone see the planes of movement?
All right.
Yes.
So we have that fore-aft plane. That one's referred to, I think that's a blue square. That's the sagittal plane of movement. We have the, and this is where it gets a little confusing, the one that slices from side to side that we would think of lateral movements happening along that plane. They describe that as the frontal plane. So that's kind of a little weird. So just think about that plane as being movements that we make laterally from side to side, like weight shifting movements, like edging movements. And then that, they call it the horizontal plane. And that's the plane that we would make rotational movements on. And so we'll talk more about those planes of movement, the lateral and the horizontal or the rotational plane in future clinics. And now, Cara, can we go to that basic athletic stance, please?
You guys
So
see
this-
that?
It's still on the old one.
Okay, let's try again here. Stand by.
Yeah, so this is the first time we've done all this stuff. So it's,
There we go.
we're working through the technology. We're learning as we're going here. Okay, so now this is right out of both these graphics are actually out of the PSIA manual. And this one's on page 16, I believe. And this would just be your basic athletic stance. Imagine yourself doing a straight run for a beginner. This would be the stance that I would love you to be in. Now, what does that look like to you? Does that look forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So, and it does appear forward. It probably feels somewhat forward, and when you're doing this, but to me, as a ski professional, I look at this as a centered stance. This is a stance where you can move in any different direction. You have tons of options of what to do in this stance. One of the most important things about looking at that photo is if you follow the line of the femur, the thigh bone, and you drew a line from the hip down through the knee and you continued that line, it would pretty much be pointing at the toe piece of the binding, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's really important. I think that in most every good turn, and certainly in our basic movement pattern, we should move to a place at some point through the upper part of the turn where we're in this position. Okay, where our femur is pointing towards the tip of the toe piece of the binding. All right. Okay, and finally, Cara, if you could go to the graphic of me skiing. This will be our final photo, and we're getting towards the end of our presentation here. So this is a picture of me skiing a few years ago. I was at the top of Scotty's. I think there were some bumps. And why I pull up this picture is because this picture precisely captures the moment in between the initiation phase and the shaping phase of the turn. You can see that my ski, I changed my edges actually in the air on this particular turn. I think probably because of the terrain that was there. And you can see, if you look down more towards my feet and my skis, you can see that the outside ski tip is just starting to contact the snow. So what I'm trying to show you with this graphic is the range of forward movement that can happen through the initiation phase. Okay, that I have actually, and in higher levels of skiing, strong advance to expert level skiing, we actually increase that range of fore-after movement in certain situations so that we can be more dynamically and deal with terrain and hit things hard and faster. And so I just more wanted to show you that it's not just, we don't all just move towards the ball of the foot all the time. We can actually move towards the toes. And when I land on that ski and that ski starts to bend, I'm pretty much going to be taking that through my big toe and then moving it back through the ball of my foot and into the middle of the ski through probably about the middle of the turn. Okay, so that's it for today. Hopefully you got something out of that. How'd you guys like that? Did that something that worked for you?
Works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
It's
All right.
great about the boot.
I'm just looking for honest feedback. You guys don't need to, and if there's areas of this that I can be improving, please let me know. If there's stuff you didn't understand or Mark, that didn't really make too much sense to me, this is the time to tell me that.
Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
One question, you said that the range will increase in terms of whether you're moving forward or backwards as your level increases. What would be one instance or when you want to move back?
Oh, great question, Gene. So, we didn't talk too much about this aspect of the ankle, but the way your ankle is built, your shin bone, and then there's a little bone behind that called the fibula. Those meet right on top of the talus bone, and the talus bone sits on top of your heel bone called the calcaneus. And so when we ski in very dynamic situations like racers or hot, types of turns where we're developing a lot of pressure, expert level skiers will actually move their weight towards the rear part of the arch so that they can stack the bones, so that they can take the pressure of that turn up through the bone structure as opposed to the soft tissue structure, which would probably happen more towards the ball of the foot. Does that make sense? And that's evidenced by kids. If you watch how kids ski, they tend to ski in a taller stance. They don't flex the boot as much, and that has to do with that they don't have so much fine motor control over those smaller muscles that are along the front of their leg. And so they tend to instinctively just rely on their bone structure to support themselves. So because they're not so strong and their nervous system isn't so developed. So they stack the bones like that and they ski over that part. So it's so that would be an example of that. It could also happen in bumps as well. At the initiation phase in bumps, we definitely want to be moving forward. That would be an example of where we would have to over-exaggerate the forward movement. But there are times when we're hitting that bump, if we're hitting that with speed, that's gonna be a big pressure buildup, and we're gonna want to take that through that bone structure that comes down more towards the heel. Good question.
Thank
Any
you.
others? All right. So my goal here today was to kind of talk to you about how do we move the body to affect movement along the length of the ski. It really comes down to our ankles and keeping our ankles flexed. That allows us to keep the bulk of us, which resides kind of below your belly button, over the middle of your foot, and then we can work our pressure forward and aft on the skis. All right. So the next one we're going to do is probably going to involve working in the rotational plane. That should be a week from this Tuesday. We're going to take a break from these, moving into next week because we have Springtacular going on, a virtual Springtacular, our first virtual Springtacular. And so we'll be picking this up again on Tuesday. And I don't know that date, but it will be a week from this coming Tuesday at 8:30 in the morning. And we'll talk about movements in the rotational plane. It'll be pretty much set up like today. We'll want to be in tennis shoes, something to lean on probably. And I'll try and come up with some tasks where we can explore those kind of things. And I'm hoping to even have a little bit of a guest presenter, my daughter, Kaylin. Hopefully I can get her to help us out. She's really keen to do this. She's a budding little ski instructor. So maybe we'll get a guest appearance. All right. Any other questions before we go?
Question for housekeeping. Do you want us to log this stuff in on the volunteer stuff? I'm not sure if you guys want the hours shown or not.
That's a great question, Carrie. We haven't really even thought of that, but my initial reaction would be sure. Why not?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and sign out the way that you normally would with the form on the website, and we'll tally it up. I was wondering when someone would ask about keeping track of hours. So thank you, Carrie.
Well, I only want to do it if it helps the program. I promise.
Well, it does in the sense that we want to keep an accurate record of how much we train you guys and how many hours we devote to training and how many hours you guys get towards training. So yes, that's great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, so about footwear, Mark, I was thinking as I was watching you and trying to follow your demos today, I was wishing that I actually thought I might learn more if I was wearing ski boots. Actually,
I had a ski boot here, and I was actually going to do 1 foot in a ski boot and 1 foot out of a ski boot, but I decided against it for some reason. I think that what I would do, Em, is I would practice these movements without ski boots on, and then go ahead and put your ski boots on and see how they relate and how they feel with them in there. I think that in those ankle movements, you'll find that range of motion will be more limited by the ski boot, but it still needs to be there. Okay, and that's the big key, is that you can still make those movements inside the boot. All right, and they'll be more limited, but when you're balanced towards the front half of your foot, very small lateral movements of your ankle will have a very, very big effect on the skis. It's really quite surprising. When you're not used to skiing in that place and you're used to skiing more on the rear part of your foot, you have to make bigger lateral movements to get anything to happen with the ski. But when you start to move your weight more forward, very small movements laterally of your ankles will do a lot with the skis. And also one thing to practice as well is that equal ankle angle part of what I was talking about. Flex and roll both ankles. Okay, that would be very helpful as well. Great question.
and here's another question. This is a wobble board. And I was actually playing around with the wobble board during your demos, because you can actually tip that. You can tip it.
Right. I can't really see you right now because something unusual has happened, but I'm imagining that that's a circular piece of wood on top of a ball or something like that, and you're balancing on it. Is that what that is?
Yeah. Actually, it's a round board, and it's on not a ball. Well, it's kind of a ball. It's kind
Like
of
a half ball.
Yeah, half ball.
Yeah.
And you can move it in all different planes.
Right.
And it's a core exerciser because you try and keep it like that. But it also
yeah.
good ankle. I don't know. I was playing around with different toys that I have here.
I think it's great. I want to get one. I want to get two. That would be great. Yeah. I have to look that up. All right, cool. Thanks.
Mark,
Ellen. Yes.
just as an aside, the PSIA e-learning course on the 5 fundamentals is an excellent thing to take along with what you're doing.
Okay.
I took it and it was actually one of the best. I finally am starting to understand all the 5 fundamentals, also as they relate to the skills. I never make that distinction. So I recommend that course, and it doesn't show you the specifics on how to do it like you're going through, but it would be a great guide to do. It's $40 and you get 2 credits if anybody's interested.
Yeah.
Look at it, and I highly recommend it.
And there are some other really good e-learning stuff on there too. I would have to recommend that everybody take the level 1 e-learning course. I took it and I was really like, wow, this was really good. Mostly because the terminology and the way we're thinking about teaching instructors on how to teach and having them work with students, it's sort of evolved a little bit, I guess you would say. And skiing is still skiing. The human body is still the human body. But if you took a level 1 a while ago and before they did this e-learning stuff, I'd recommend you go and you do that. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it's free. If you're already a level 1 and you're a member, you can go take that course and it's free. And there's another one on movement analysis.
Yeah.
That's really good, and that's free as well. And it relates a lot about what we're talking about versus ideal movement pattern, real movement patterns, which would be like what people really do, versus the ideal movement pattern, which is kind of what I'm trying to teach you guys. And that's a really good one too. And highly recommend those. Those last 2 are free, the level 1 and the movement analysis one. I think it's totally worth your time, keeps your head in the game, and keeps you kind of up to date with some of the terminology that we're working with.
Yeah, the children's teaching is also free.
Okay, good.
Is that in the section of the PSIA website that's called the Matrix, I think?
No, the Matrix is like a bunch of videos of different maneuvers and things. If you go to the snowpros.org website and you click on education, there's a bar across there and it's education, and then there's a drop down that says e-learning. It takes you to another website. It's another SnowPros website that's an e-learning center, and you can log in there. Or you might have to log in first before you're allowed to go there. I think you log in either place. And then it will take you to a whole menu of e-learning options.
Okay.
It's not really the Matrix, although they use the Matrix, scenes from the Matrix in the e-learning courses. And so this is a great way to kind of continue to get some educational credits as well as doing some of these courses.
Hey, Mark and Becky, if you guys send me the links to the things that you think are useful, I will I'll put them on our website on the volunteer resources page.
Cool.
Thank
Great.
you. Cara, can you send, especially the planes of motion, a diagram that you had up on the screen, but it was too small to really, it would be good for next time, if there are any informational graphics like that, to have, that we could print them out before.
Oh, okay, great. That's good feedback. Yep.
Good.
Carl, what will you do with the recording? Will that be available?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was thinking maybe I'll post all of the I'll put all of these the recordings that we do on our YouTube or our Vimeo channel, and then link them to the volunteer resources page on the website. And we haven't really talked about that yet, but I was thinking about that today.
Thank you, you guys.